Several years ago, my parents had to move out of state when my dad was offered a new job, which left me in kind of a bind. I was currently enrolled in college, and I didn't want to quit and move with them. So I needed to find a job that worked around my school schedule and still gave me enough money for rent. This left me only one option: taking a job as a night stocking position at the local IKEA. The job seemed relatively straightforward: scan an item and put it on the shelf. It wasn't exactly rocket science. For the first 3 weeks, I worked the swing shift while I trained. On the 4th week, I was switched to nights. I was surprised to find out when I arrived that there would only be 2 of us working the night shift, me and my supervisor, Nick. I had worked with Nick briefly before, but never directly. He was about 10 years older, and his wife just had a baby, who we talked about obsessively. After 20 minutes of listening to Nick in the break room talk about diaper changes, he sent me to work stocking LED light bulbs in the lighting area. I noticed a Snickers bar sitting on one of the break room tables. I had forgotten to bring a lunch, so I grabbed the candy bar and shoved it into my pocket, thinking that someone left it there to take. At first, being in the dark store was kind of creepy, especially when you're alone. I kept seeing strange, shadowy images lingering around the store, which usually turned out to be nothing more than displays. It's amazing just how much a floor lamp behind a bookcase looks like another person. To get my thoughts away from just how quiet the store was, I decided to use my headphones and focus on my job. Sometime around 1 a.m., I noticed a light flash behind me, like someone had walked past and blocked one of the lamps. I removed my headphones, listening to the store in case Nick was calling for me. The area was eerily silent.
"Where's my damn Snickers bar?"
I heard someone whisper. "Nick?" After a few minutes of silence, I decided it was my imagination and put back my earbuds. Halfway through the box of light bulbs, my bladder felt like it was going to explode, a serious downside of drinking a gallon worth of Mountain Dew to stay awake. I looked around to tell Nick where I was going, but there was no sign of him. "Nick?" When he didn't respond, I figured he was on the other side of the store and wouldn't notice I stepped away. In the hallway leading to the bathrooms, I kept hearing Nick muttering something in the picture aisle. He was talking so low, I couldn't exactly make out what he was saying. "Hey Nick, is everything okay?" I listened, but didn't hear a response. I would have waited for him to say something, but I really needed to go. The lights were on inside the women's restroom. For some reason, the restroom felt even colder than inside the store. One of the faucet's hot water handles was turned on full. The sink's drain had been blocked with paper towels, allowing the water to fill up the basin. Steam rose from the sink, creating a cloud of moisture against the mirror. How strange. I turned off the faucet. Then I realized the light was on when I entered. The company had installed lights that turned off if no one was using a room, so that meant someone had to be inside. Then, I also realized that if the water had been running since closing, the sink would have flooded the restroom by then. None of which occurred to me until after I was doing my business in one of the stalls. That's when I noticed a pair of black tennis shoes standing in front of the stall. Panic gripped my throat, causing me to cough. "Nick, is that you?" The shoes disappeared. Then I heard the woman's bathroom door open and close. I quickly cleaned up and ran out of the restroom. As I hurried out of the hallway, I ran directly into Nick. "Were you just in the women's bathroom?"
"What? No. Why would I be in the girls' room?"
Nick asked. I looked down at his shoes, which were covered by protective booties. I could have sworn... Never mind. What do you need?
"I want to tell you it's time for a break, but it looks like you were on one already."
Nick accused. "Yeah, I ran to the bathroom." I paused, hearing one of the displays scraping against the tile floor. "Did you hear that?"
"Hear what?"
Nick asked, scanning the room.
"Probably a small earthquake."
Then, the sound of boxes tumbling on a shelf caused Nick to jump out into the main aisle.
"Who's there? Grab me something I can use as a weapon."
Nick demanded, motioning to the shelves behind me. We were in housewares, and the first thing I found that looked like a weapon was a ladle. I handed it to Nick, who held it out in front of him to use as protection.
Seriously?
I shrugged. Would you rather I hand you a pasta spoon?
Whatever. Stay here and call security. I'm gonna go see who it is.
Nick ordered. But I started to protest, but he already started walking away. How do I call security? A glass jar flew through the air, missing my head by mere inches as it crashed against the shelves behind me.
Where's my damn Snickers bar?
A low, grumbling voice growled. Nick! I screamed out, running in the direction Nick disappeared to. Somewhere between bedding and closet organization, I lost Nick's trail. I turned to the right, searching for any sign of Nick. I didn't want to call out for him just in case whoever threw the jar was nearby. Though I wasn't convinced that it wasn't Nick still playing a prank on me. I continued into the closet section, walking into the row for mirrors. There, I stood, listening for Nick. All I could hear was the gentle hum of the heaters as they turned on. Then I turned, seeing my image on the wall of display mirrors. Behind me, I could just see a grisly image of a man clothed in black with a long, wiry beard. His raised eyes stared at me as his lips parted to smile, his teeth blackened and missing. Look, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was your Snickers. The candy bar was still in my pocket. I took it out, offering it to the man who snatched it from me like a wild animal.
Freeze!
A security officer called out from behind the man. Nick ran from behind the security officer to me, holding onto my shoulder.
Are you okay?
I nodded, shaken by the experience. The man's name was Henry, and he had suffered from schizophrenia all his life. It turned out he had snuck in through the dock that evening. He'd been living in a warehouse behind the store for many years. The typical security officer, Mike, who worked the night shift, would bring Henry a Snickers bar in exchange for staying off the property. However, that night, Mike had called off sick, and the new guy had forgotten to give Henry the candy bar that Mike had left in the break room. I continued to work the night shift from time to time throughout college. Whenever I did, I made a habit of always carrying a Snickers bar, just in case Henry showed up again.
Before starting the story, I would suggest you guys to go subscribe to the channel. It turns out that most of you guys who watch me aren't actually subscribed. So, if you like the content and want to support the channel, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell. It's free, and you can always change your mind later.
It was my first ever shift. I had been job searching for just over 2 months when a position at my town's local IKEA opened up an opportunity. Not having much other choice, I went for it. I was 17 at the time, and highly unqualified. Yet, somehow I got the job. On my first shift, my other coworkers almost immediately came up to me and warned me not to make any mistakes. One of the more friendly ones, Sam, looked exhausted and terrified. Our boss, he's not right. There have been many before you who supposedly quit on the first shift, but nobody ever saw them leave. I say Mr. Walker had something to do with it. He's been to prison, you know. Though he won't say why, so don't ask him. Avoid him all you can. After giving me the warning, he left to go and get started on the task for the day, like cleaning and restocking the shelves, running inventory, etc. I kinda just stood there for a while, unnerved, scared even. When I applied, I was never even given an interview. They just accepted it. He just accepted it. Once I got going after that, however, the rest of the shift went pretty well. I was on till for around 2 hours before being moved on to restocking like Sam was doing earlier. As he handed me the clipboard and pen and pointed me to the storage room, he whispered to me, Jessica was the one you replaced. She went missing just a week ago on the exact same shift you're on now. Please, be careful. I opened my mouth to answer him, but he had already moved off after putting the supplies in my arms. I was a little shaken to say the least, but I had to keep going. It sounded like this job was volatile. Not sure if that's the right word to call it now, but I think you get the picture. After checking the first half of the store, the announcement came that the store was closing. As I watched the final few customers leave, I began making my way over towards the back of the store, where I thought the rest of the restocking was needed. The deeper I went into the store, the more I noticed the shelves were growing emptier and emptier. There was a no access sign next to one of the final corridors. I ignored it, thinking it was for customers only. Sam was at the opposite end of the store. He was logging the profits and cleaning out the front desk. I checked around me before entering. It seemed darker. The lights were dimmer the further I traveled into the restricted zone. Just a few steps in, I noticed a foul, rotten smell. I breathed in once, reeled back, and had to cover my mouth to avoid vomiting. It was utterly grotesque. I stepped back and the smell faded. I stepped forward and it intensified. I squinted and looked further down the corridor, searching for the source. At the very end there was a metal door, open. There was a red light glowing from it. It looked far too odd to explore alone, so I radioed for Sam. "Hey, Sam, could you come to the back of the store? There's this horrid smell and a weird door. I don't know what it is, but I'm coming." He was blunt, like he already knew. Moments later, a clamor of footsteps came thundering down the corridors of shelves. "I'm here. Where's the door?" Sam arrived promptly. He was panting, out of breath, his face red with panic. "Right there." I pointed towards the door. His eyes followed my finger, and at once we were both locked onto it. The door. Slowly we crept towards it. Soon enough, we arrived outside the door, and peering in, we froze. Sam lurched back, also covering his mouth. His face went green. I stood there, paralyzed. I was now facing a room full of thick metal cages, small and filled with the corpses of rotting flesh. All of them were still wearing the IKEA uniform. Some had gashes in their skulls, some had severed necks, but most were still somewhat fresh. "Oh God." Sam stuck his head back around the corner. "That's..." Trembling, his hand lifted up and pointed towards one of the cages. There was a woman's body in it, her hair ripped out in large clumps, her lips white and dry. "That's Jessica." Suddenly, a loud thud of footsteps and tools clanging echoed from down the corridor. Still brimming with disgust, we backed out of the room and stood stiffly in the middle of the corridor. Mr. Walker, the boss, stared at us, a deranged look of shock blazing from his eyes. Carefully, he put down the box he was carrying. As he laid it onto the floor, I soon noticed that Sam was backing up in the corner of my eye. My eyes then refocused back to the box. He was pulling something out of it. Inch by inch, a meter-long machete was carefully drawn out of the box. The metal glowed in the dimly lit corridor. There was blood dripping from it. Sam grabbed me by the arm. "Run!" Instantly, he pulled me back and we ran into the room, slamming the door shut behind us. He held the door whilst I dialed for the police. Simultaneously, Walker reached the other side of the door and began to hammer into it, slashing it with his blade. He wanted in. Sam's face winced with every smash, every shout, every threat. He remained firm, however. The bodies of all his previous co-workers drove him to stay put. After around 30 minutes, the sound of police came charging down the corridor. With floods of tears, we opened the door and showed them the horror surrounding us. Even the police appeared shaken. They asked where he was, the man responsible for such a vile display of inhumanity. He was gone. After that, the store was brought under new management once all the bodies and cages had been cleared. Mr. Walker was revealed to have been jailed for homicide several years ago. He had murdered both his wife and kids back in the 80s. Since then, Sam and I have never returned. Instead, every now and then, I join him to visit Jessica's grave, amongst the many others.
I was just about giving up on getting a decent job when I got a call from the IKEA I'd applied to a few months back. The previous security guard who worked weekend nights only left due to a minor workplace accident, and they were willing to pay me well to start as soon as I could. I tried to ask about the accident, but the interviewer told me not to worry. The kid was completely fine, just a bit shaken up. I could relate to that. I'd gotten hurt like that before. It's hard to go back to places where you feel like history might repeat itself. So, I didn't think too much about it at the time. As long as I could get money, I was happy to do.
How do you get started with digital marketing? With a complete digital marketing course on Udemy.
I was happy to do virtually anything. After all, I was basically on the brink of being tossed out of my apartment for being unable to pay rent. I shook my head as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. This really isn't the time to think about this, dude. I've worked many night shifts before and I liked talking to myself. I also liked exploring the floor of whatever store I was working at, which is why I'd been fired a few times. Apparently people preferred to keep security in their rooms and never on the floor of their stores. Oh well, those times have passed. I was encouraged to roam the IKEA by my current boss, a middle-aged man with bug eyes and a crooked smile. I mean, they have cameras everywhere anyway, right? Not that I could steal. Just as I was talking to myself, I really did enjoy my own company for the most part after all, a large thud echoed in the empty showroom. Huh? I approached the source of the sound cautiously. It was one of the small kitchens, complete with a stove and everything. There was a broken vase on the ground, shattered into pieces, but the oddest thing was that the stove was on. Is this even plugged in? I went around to check, but as I'd suspected, it wasn't. Well, that's a bit odd. Still, eyes must be playing tricks on me. Had this been my first night shift as a security guard, I would have freaked out. However, I wasn't a stranger to being pranked by other employees. And, well, the IKEA was massive. It felt like the perfect playground for some bored teens who thought it was fun to mess with their elders. Very funny, guys. I almost got worried about the ghost you guys were talking about earlier. I caught the day shift guys right as they were leaving the building. One of them called me crazy for taking on the night on my own. Maybe that was his way of preparing me for what came. What are you guys up to now? I was getting a bit agitated. I needed the money, and that meant staying calm and not getting into a fight with whoever had snuck in to mess with me. However, that was harder than I thought. I tried to make my steps heavier, slamming my work boots against the ground as I walked. You know, if I catch you, you're gonna have a very nice chat with the manager. I bet that's not what you want, right? A few meters from the kitchen I'd been standing in was a bathroom. I expected my work friends to be there, as that's where the most recent crash came from. But there was nothing, just a shattered mirror on the ground. Well, there was something else, too. A weird note with "Get Out" scribbled on it. Okay, this is getting weird. Then again, the whole situation was a bit weird. Why would someone who'd worked all day sneak in just to mess with a newbie? It had happened to me before, but I still couldn't grasp just why. And, well, against my better judgment, I felt that there was someone or something in the building with me. But that was impossible. See, when you work security for a long enough time and love snooping around places you should not go to unless there's an emergency, you start to recognize the sounds people make. Walking, moving around, even just breathing. There was nothing. Okay, this isn't funny. Something just didn't feel right. It felt like I'd been wandering the rooms for hours by then. And yet, when I looked at my watch, I was only 10 minutes into my shift. Okay, I still have 7 hours to go. I'll just sit down and hope for the best. My plan failed. I went up to the door of the security room, but it was locked shut. What the hell? I wrestled with the door until it eventually gave way. By then, I was panting, terror creeping up my spine. Something wasn't letting me relax. Words froze in my throat as I barricaded the entry. Just what on earth was going on? Only then did I realize that the cameras I was supposed to watch were still very much on. Okay, that's good. Let's just find those punks. I bet you're all laughing your heads off. I know it's you. Kids, no matter how much I stared at the footage, I found no one but me in the store. I was truly on my own, and yet And yet, I hadn't noticed it much before, but the rooms themselves constantly moved. A glass switched places with a vase here, a TV turned around there, and so on. Is this place haunted? I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. Suddenly, I felt the air in the room shift. It was so cold all of a sudden. I heard it again. Laughter bounced off the wall, loud and sharp. I felt cold, heavy arms wrap around my body, keeping me in place. And then, I ran. The only feasible way out was through the windows. The store's main door was locked, and I didn't have the time to mess with the alarm system. Luckily, I wasn't too high up. It didn't feel like such a hard thing to do, but it was still a struggle, dragging my body around with what felt like hundreds of pounds of extra weight on me. Let me go! I managed to somehow twist my body around, and within seconds, I was out. But as I ran away as fast as I could, something landed atop my head. It was a sheet of paper, sticky and gross from the rain. The wind must have ripped it off whichever building it was plastered to. As I tried to check it out with still trembling hands, I realized that perhaps there was a reason why I'd been offered a lot more money than normal for the job. It was a missing poster, and the name on it was awfully familiar.